All right, so this particular thing which is happening in Africa is something that is very shocking. Okay, it is something that is very shocking, and a lot of people are really shocked that this thing is still going on. I mean, it started in Mali when a coup d'etat happened. It spread to Niger, then it came to Guinea, went to Gabon, and ultimately went to Burkina Faso. And then after this, we've seen strings of many coup d'etat and coup d'etat attempts in various African countries. And the latest to join in is Madagascar. So if you are watching this, news coming in kind of suggests that Madagascar recently had a coup d'etat. And then surprisingly, the military leader has been sworn in as president. Now, this was not a military leader who ultimately said, or who ultimately got up and said, hey, let me organize a coup d'etat. No, it started from somewhere and it headed to this particular direction. Now, why am I saying this? It all started when the Gen Z in Madagascar started demonstrating. Remember that I think last year around this time, Kenya was also protesting. There were a lot of youth uprising and protests in Kenya. But ultimately, because of Raila Odinga and how the country kind of came together trying to resolve the issue, the protests kind of died down a little bit. Now, for Madagascar, these protests carried on for weeks. Remember, the main age bracket who were fueling this particular kind of coup d'etat were the Gen Zs. The Gen Zs are basically a term we use for those who've been born or those who were born between 1997 to 2000. These people are termed as the Gen Z, or to 2004. These people are termed as the Generation Z. And for them, they believe that the country's resources, which is being shared, it's not done right. You know, a portion of people are always enjoying and others are always suffering. Because of that, the Gen Z, they were protesting financial problems. They were also protesting about economic hardship, bad governance, corruption, and so forth. And ultimately, military had to step in, seize the government, and then the president, as at that time, he fled the country, saying that his life, together with that of his children and wife, were under siege, were under attack. So he left, and ultimately the military took over, and this man who happened to be the head of the military, took over, and ultimately he's been sworn in as the president. Now, there is a lot of things that have happened. We'll be getting into details of it. So this is a live video. Ultimately, we'll be talking about a lot of things. Very soon, also be talking about what is happening in our country, Ghana, in regards with Odobroni, that Lumba, musician icon, that Lumba, in regards with his two wives, Odobroni and Akusia Sewa, the court update. And also, we'll be talking about what is happening between musician Medical and also Easy Bebe, because there's a whole lot of things going on. I'm learning that Medical just received a bouncing baby boy together. Also, we are also learning that Fela McCarthy have reacted to all of this thing going on. So let us start up with this particular news. Now, what you are watching on the screens is just a snippet of when the military leader who actually staged or perhaps pushed through with this coup d'etat was sworn into office. And it just tells you that Africa has a long way to go. So before we even proceed, we would like to go to BBC and see exactly what BBC said about all of these. So sorry, I'm having a cold today. So this is exactly what BBC is saying. So we're on BBC's page, and as you can see, BBC posted a lengthy article about this. Yeah. It posted, or BBC posted, Madagascar's military leader thanks Jay-Z protesters as he's sworn in. So this is the Madagascar military leader. So his name is Michael Randriana. Randian Arena. Forgive me if I don't get the name right, but then that is his name. So it starts by saying Colonel Michael Randriana has been sworn in as the new president of Madagascar days after military takeover on the Indian Ocean nation. He swapped his fatigues for a suit and thanked the young people who took to the streets for weeks of protests and prompted President Andre Rajoelina to flee the country and for weeks of protest that prompted President Andry Rajoelina to flee the country and led to his impeachment. So basically, Madagascar had a president up until this whole protest, okay? So the president as at that time, his name was Andry Rajoelina. But then because of the protests of the youth, he had to flee the country, and ultimately his own parliament had to impeach him, which means basically he's no more the president of Madagascar. Now, it continues to read, the ceremony took place at the Constitutional Court in the capital, Antananarivo, where a large crowd gathered to watch, including those who spearheaded the demonstration. Today marks a historic turning point for our country, with the people in full fervor, driven by the desire for change. We joyfully open a new chapter in the life of our nation, he said. So these were the words of the current president, who was also a former colonel, whose name is Colonel Michael Wadrina. So this was what he said when he was sworn in as president. Now he continues to read that the former French colony now enters a transition period, which will be full of political obstacles and legal uncertainty. Though there's a cautious optimism about Colonel Wadrina's leadership, Constitutional Court President Florent Rakotorisia has criticized the international community for describing the situation in Madagascar as a coup. So in as much as people are happy about this, and also just before this report, I realized that UN said what happened in Madagascar is unconstitutional. So UN is not happy with what has happened in Madagascar. But then you could see that the Constitutional Court President Florent Rakotorisia said that the international community describing the situation as a coup, it's not right. It was a president who was impeached, the military took over, and then they have sworn in a person that they believe, or the country believe, can help them. Now, it continues to read, protesters had hoped that Rajoelina would simply resign and pave the way for a smooth democratic transition. Instead, he climbed to power, dissolving the government and holding a series of dialogues with different groups of people, efforts that were not enough to appease the protesters. So all these while that the protests were going on, people were hoping that President Rajoelina would just simply say, hey, I'm stepping down. But what he did was he dissolved the government, saying that, let me just dissolve the whole government. And also, after he had dissolved the government, he was in talks with the smaller fractions, political parties, opinion leaders, rival groups, talking about traditional rulers, that you see, we have dissolved the government, so let's make amends and form a new government. But then that was not enough to appease the youth, and ultimately he had to flee the country. It goes on to read, instead it goes on to read that the protests we started last month were initially organized by a young movement known as Gen Z Mother, angered by persistent power and water shortages. So what has been happening in Nigeria, what has been happening in Ghana? Okay, so last time someone posted something when Hilda Bazi was doing Guinness World Record for the biggest African jollof or Nigerian jollof, and people showed up to that event, and someone posted that I think Gege or so posted that whilst other countries are busily demonstrating against economic hardship, power failures, water shortages, lack of employment, mismanagement, corruption, Nigerians are busily parading around Hilda Baci. So you see, elsewhere in Madagascar, there was water shortages. There was constant electricity power outages. These things were ongoing for a period of time, an extensive time to be precise. And you realize that since this issue has been constant, and each and every time the government keeps promising we'll do better, we'll fix things, the same dialogue, the Gen Z had enough. So a young protester, who goes by the name Gen Z Mother, he organized this protest saying that enough is enough. And ultimately people joined in. They protested, and that led to the downfall of their governments. If water shortages and water shortages and power outages can oust a government out of power, then in Ghana, in Nigeria, and in parts of the world, we are joking. Ghana, let's give credit to President John Dramani Mahama, because he's done well with, the power. It's cool, but it's not really perfect. But then, since he came to power, he's been able to put that under control. Water have been flowing consistently. But then in other parts of Africa, Nigeria and other parts, it is worse. Uganda, Cameroon, it is worse. So ultimately, these were the two motivating factors that pushed the Gen Zs in Madagascar to protest and ultimately make sure they brought down their government. And I think a similar thing happened in Nepal too. So let's continue. It goes on to say, Colonel Randolina was head of Madagascar's elite Capsat army unit. Okay, so it says Colonel Randolina was head of Madagascar's elite Capsat army unit when on Tuesday his troops joined the thousands of protesters on the streets of capital. He told the Gen Z demonstrators he was taking power and that the military will form a government and hold elections within 2 years. So the colonel said, the protest has been going on. The president had fled. So now he needs to take matters into his own hands, because you can't have a country without a leader. So he met the protesters halfway and told them that, see, he is a military leader. He's the head of the elite Capsat army unit. And then he wants to tell the protesters that he will be seizing power, and then he will ultimately form a new government. And this new government that is going to form ultimately will hold elections in the next 2 years. So we are in 2025, which means in 2027, we should be seeing Madagascar head to the polls. If he does a good job, I'm sure that he will be retained. He will be retained. He could stand for the elections, or in the elections, he could stand in the upcoming elections, and he could win. If he does a good job in bringing the country together, forming a new government, and then stopping the basic things that people demonstrated about. Now, it further goes on to read, democracy advocates both inside and outside the country hope that this promise will be fulfilled. At a ceremony at the country's top court, Reuters news agency reports that trumpets bled after Randolina took his oath of office, promising to dedicate all my strength to defending and strengthening national unity and human rights. Wearing an official sash and star of office, he reaffirmed his commitments to change. We will work hand in hand with all driving forces of the nation to draft a fine constitution, he said, adding the electoral reforms will be instituted before a new vote was held. He further goes on to say, we are committed to breaking with past. Our main mission is to thoroughly reform the country's administrative, social, economic, and political systems of governance. After the economy, the new president spoke to reporters outside the Constitutional Court and outlined in more detail what he considered to be his top priorities. He said he will start with launching an investigation into the state-owned water and power company, Jirama. Okay, so he's saying that, the first thing he's going to do is to tackle the issues that brought about this whole demonstration. So the power outages and the water outages is going to order investigations into it. Today and tomorrow, we will examine the situation at Jirama, what is happening there, and what problems currently exist. The review aims to prevent further difficulties in the future. That is our first social priority, he said. The second priority is rice farming. As we enter the agricultural season, we must assess how best to proceed. The third priority is the appointment of the prime minister and formation of the government. So he's saying that in as much as he's going to tackle all of this, he's also going to look at the country's top economic or financial earner, which happens to be producing rice. So he's going to make sure that how best the country can produce rice, and ultimately he's going to appoint a prime minister and form a new government. Now, he goes on to say that the third priority is the appointment of the prime minister and the formation of the government. Like other French colonies in Africa that have experienced coup in recent years, it has been hinted that relations with France may have changed under the leadership with warmer ties with Russia. On Thursday, Randolina attended a meeting with Russia embassy officials to reportedly address serious cooperation between two countries. Earlier during the protests, people had been seen on the streets waving Russian flags, calling for Moscow intervention. So this is a pattern, okay, which has been happening in various African countries. Usually when a coup happens, the coup that happened in Mali, the coup that happened in Guinea, the coup that happened in Niger, the coup that happened in Burkina Faso, these countries ultimately pushed the French troops out of their country. Ultimately, they closed down the French embassies. And ultimately, what they also did was they kind of cement their way to the Russian government. And that's why we see Ibrahim Traoré, he's been invited to Russia several times. Many of these leaders who came to power through coup d'etat, they now see, or they deserted the French whole movement, or the French ties, the France ties, and they are now warming up to Russia. And this is something that is very sad because all across the country, most of the coup d'etats that have been happening, these coup d'etats that have been happening, ultimately, one of the things you realize is that most of the leaders who organize this particular kind of coup d'etat, they kind of push their way towards Russia. Basically, they are more inclined with Russia and all of those. So that is exactly what is really going on in the camp of Madagascar, and it's something that is really, 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 really shocking. But ultimately, we believe that the people of Madagascar, perhaps they kind of thought through, and they realized that this was a moment that they needed, okay, to kind of stop certain things and make sure that their country heads in their right direction. And this is something, a warning to the Anglophone countries like Nigeria, Ghana, because usually this uprising is more like a wave. It starts from at a country, at a distant country or a neighboring country. Before I realize, it kind of spreads across. But then consistently for the past 30 years, Ghana have been fortunate to have a democracy with no coup d'etat, and we just hope that this kind of rule continue. So that is exactly what is really going on in our country, in Madagascar, and it's something that a lot of people have been reacting to in this particular country. So that is it. We just hope that in as much as all of these things have happened, it will just be a testament, or perhaps it will just be one of those things that, as a country like Madagascar, they will use it to perhaps this will be a stepping stone for them, and they will use this to basically change their fortunes of their own country. So that is exactly this is exactly what is really going on in Madagascar, and then we will be poised to give you more updates on that. Now, I told you earlier that we'll be moving to our local news. So if you are joining us and you've been hearing or you've been listening to this whole Madagascar movement, we are transitioning to our local dialect, because we have news that we have to give to our people in our local dialect, and it is a lot of news. All right.